What if everything you were taught about power was deliberately incomplete? What if the most dangerous book ever written, a book so threatening that the church placed it on its list of forbidden texts, a book that kings quietly read in secret while publicly condemning it, was not a manual of evil, but the most honest map of reality that has ever existed? Pay close attention to what you are about to hear, because this video is not going to comfort you. It is not going to tell you that hard work is enough, that being a good person guarantees your protection, or that the world operates on the principles of fairness and merit. You have heard those things before. And deep down, in that quiet part of yourself that watches the world and notices the gap between what people say and what they do, you already know they are not entirely true. This video is going to show you something different. It is going to show you why a man who died in poverty in 1527 became, 5 centuries later, the secret philosopher of billionaires, the hidden syllabus of the most powerful corporations on earth, and the unspoken Bible of every person who has ever climbed from nothing to something real. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli, and they buried him for a reason. Think about the last time you were blindsided. Maybe it was at work. You watched someone less capable than you get the promotion. You were the one who stayed late, who delivered results, who genuinely cared about the outcome. They were the one who knew whose hand to shake, whose ego to stroke, whose name to mention at the right moment. And you stood there, confused, hurt, quietly angry, wondering how the world could be so unjust. Or maybe it was in a relationship. You gave everything you had, your time, your loyalty, your vulnerability, and you watched as that generosity was slowly taken for granted, as the dynamic shifted, as your willingness to give transformed, in their eyes, into something to be used rather than cherished. Or maybe it happened on a larger scale. You watched a politician you despised win. You watched a company you knew was corrupt attract billions in investment. You watched the loud, the aggressive, the ruthless rise, and the quiet, the principled, the patient get left behind. And you ask the same question that every intelligent person eventually asks. Why does the world work this way? Here is the answer that no one will give you in school, in church, or in the majority of self-help books lining the shelves of every airport bookstore. The world works this way because power has its own logic, and that logic does not bend to morality, to effort, or to goodness alone. It bends to understanding. It bends to those who are willing to see reality clearly, without the comfortable filters of wishful thinking. Machiavelli saw this in the 15th century. He watched the collapse of Florence. He watched the Medici family, ruthless, calculating, brilliant, build an empire of wealth and influence that survived centuries. He watched the church preach humility while amassing fortunes. He watched princes rise and fall based not on their virtue, but on their grasp of timing, perception, and force. And then he wrote it all down. In 1513, while living in exile, stripped of his position, humiliated by the very leaders he had served, Niccolò Machiavelli wrote a short book. Less than 100 pages, a book that he dedicated to Lorenzo de' Medici in a desperate attempt to reclaim his position. A letter written to power by someone who understood power more deeply than anyone of his time. He called it Il Principe, the Prince. And from the moment it circulated, it terrified everyone who read it, not because it was false, because it was true. The church moved against it immediately. In 1559, just over 30 years after Machiavelli's death, Pope Paul IV placed the prince on the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the Index of Forbidden Books. This was the official list maintained by the Catholic Church of texts considered dangerous to the faith and to the moral order of society. To be placed on it was to be declared an enemy of God and civilization. And yet, within those same decades, copies of the prince were circulating in the private libraries of every major European monarch. Henry VIII of England had a copy. Catherine de' Medici, one of the most powerful women in European history, is said to have carried it with her constantly. Cardinal Richelieu, the architect of French absolute monarchy, studied it obsessively. Elizabeth I's advisors were deeply familiar with its principles. Notice what was happening. The powerful condemned the book in public and read it in private. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern. And it is the same pattern that has repeated itself across 500 years of human history, up to and including the world you live in today. Because here is what they understood, and what they did not want you to understand. The person who knows the rules of power and uses them has an almost insurmountable advantage over the person who has been told those rules do not exist. When you are taught that virtue alone is enough to succeed, while others are quietly learning the mechanics of influence, persuasion, timing, and strategic positioning, you are not being protected. You are being managed. You are being kept soft in a world that rewards hardness, kept naive in a world that rewards clarity, kept passive in a world that rewards decisive action. Machiavelli did not invent the rules of power. He revealed them, and for that, they tried to erase him. Let us be precise about what Machiavelli actually said, because one of the most effective ways to suppress dangerous knowledge is not to destroy it, but to caricature it, to take a complex, nuanced, philosophically sophisticated work and reduce it to a single grotesque image, to take the man's name and turn it into an adjective that means cold, scheming, and evil. The word Machiavellian today is used as an insult. That is the censorship working exactly as intended. Here is what the book actually argues. Machiavelli begins from a single radical premise: the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. He was not a cynic who believed that all people are evil. He was a realist who observed that all people are capable of both virtue and self-interest, and that in high-stakes situations, self-interest tends to dominate. He was a man who had spent years in the Florentine civil service, watching governments rise and fall, watching alliances form and break, watching the most pious men on earth commit the most ruthless acts when the stakes were high enough. And he concluded something that philosophers before him had been unwilling to say directly. If you want to lead, if you want to survive, if you want to protect what you have built and the people who depend on you, you cannot rely on morality alone. You must understand force. You must understand perception. You must understand when to be the lion and when to be the fox. A prince must know how to use both the beast and the man, he wrote. Those who have relied simply on the lion have not always succeeded. This was not a call to become a monster. It was a call to become complete. It was an acknowledgement that the person who knows only one way of moving through the world, who only knows how to be kind, only knows how to be forceful, only knows how to cooperate, only knows how to fight, is always at a disadvantage against the person who knows all of it and chooses deliberately, situationally, strategically. The powerful understood this. They still do. Let us talk about what happened after the official suppression. The book was banned, the name was turned into a curse, and the knowledge, the actual, practical knowledge contained within its pages, went underground. It did not disappear, it transformed. It moved into the private education of the aristocracy, into the tutoring of young nobles who would inherit power. It moved into the strategic consulting of royal courts, passed orally from advisor to advisor. It moved into the thinking of military commanders, diplomats, and merchants who could not afford to operate on wishful thinking when the stakes were the lives of thousands or the survival of a dynasty. And then, as the world industrialized, as the age of monarchs gave way to the age of corporations and capital, it moved again. It moved into the boardrooms of the new powerful, into the philosophy, and spoken or unspoken, of the men who built the great industrial empires of the 19th and 20th centuries: Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan. You think these men succeeded because they worked hard and had good values? They did work hard. Some of them did have values that in certain contexts they genuinely lived by. But what distinguished them from the millions of other hard-working, values-driven people of their era was something else entirely. They understood power. Rockefeller did not build Standard Oil by being nice. He built it through a strategy of systematic acquisition, alliance, and the deliberate destruction of competitors, using every legal, financial, and political tool available to him. When the tools ran out, he created new ones. He lobbied for legislation that benefited him. He formed secret agreements with railroad companies to undercut rivals. He moved with the patience of a man who understood that dominance is a long game, not a sprint. Machiavelli would have recognized every move. Men ought either to be well treated or crushed, Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, because they can avenge themselves of lighter injuries, of more serious ones they cannot. Rockefeller did not crush his enemies out of cruelty. He crushed them because he understood that a wounded competitor who survives becomes a motivated enemy. That half measures in the pursuit of dominance are more dangerous than either inaction or total commitment. This is not a lesson taught in business school, it is a lesson learned in private. Now fast forward to the present. The knowledge is still circulating, but now it has new vehicles. Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power, a book that is, in many ways, a modern translation of Machiavellian principles into contemporary language, has been one of the most quietly influential books of the last 30 years. It is famously popular among two groups, prisoners and executives. Think about what that tells you about the distribution of power knowledge in our society. The people at the very bottom of the social hierarchy and the people at the very top both recognize the value of understanding the raw mechanics of power. Everyone in the middle, comfortable enough not to feel urgency, conditioned enough not to question the official story, is still operating on the myth that virtue and hard work are sufficient. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. The architects of Silicon Valley. Whether or not they have read Machiavelli directly, and many of them have, they operate by his principles. The principle of strategic ambiguity. Never fully reveal your plans until they are complete. The principle of creative destruction. Do not preserve what is obsolete. Replace it before your competitor does. The principle of perception management. It does not matter only what you do, it matters how you are seen to do it. Everyone sees what you appear to be, so Machiavelli wrote. Few experience what you really are. In the age of social media, of personal branding, of carefully curated public images, of the difference between what is said on stage at a TED Talk and what is decided behind closed doors, this single sentence from a 500-year-old text is more relevant than almost anything published this year. But here is what makes this more than just a history lesson. Here is why you should not simply admire this knowledge from a distance. You are already operating in this world. You are already navigating workplaces, relationships, social structures, and institutions that are governed by the rules of power, whether you acknowledge those rules or not. You are already either using leverage or being leveraged. You are already either shaping perceptions or being shaped by them. You are already either moving with strategic intention or drifting with the current. The question is not whether you will engage with power. You already are. The question is whether you will do so consciously, with the full awareness and capability that this knowledge provides, or whether you will continue to wonder why the results you are getting do not match the effort you are putting in. Machiavelli spent his life watching the gap between the world as it is taught and the world as it operates, and he wrote a book about it, and they banned it. And the people who read it anyway built the world you live in. If you are still watching, if something in what you have heard has resonated in a place that is honest and clear-eyed rather than comfortable, then keep paying attention, because we have only just begun. What you have heard so far is the surface, the history, the context. What comes next is the substance. What comes next are the actual principles, the specific architecture of Machiavellian thinking that has been absorbed, quietly, deliberately across 500 years, by every person who has ever built real power. Not the caricature, not the cartoon villain, the real thing. Stay with me, because the most important part is not what was banned, it is what was learned by those who banned it and then used it anyway. And once you understand it, you will see it everywhere. In the boardroom, in the political arena, in the quiet dynamics of every social group you have ever been part of, you will see the game. And seeing the game is the first step to playing it on your own terms. Continue watching. Let us get into the architecture, not the mythology, not the legend. The actual structure of Machiavellian thinking, the specific principles that have been absorbed by the powerful and withheld from everyone else. The 5 pillars, the 5 ways of seeing that separate those who navigate the world as it is from those who navigate the world as they wish it were. Because this is not philosophy for its own sake. This is a blueprint. And if you can hold these 5 principles in your mind simultaneously, if you can see through the lens that Machiavelli ground so precisely 5 centuries ago, then you will never look at a social situation, a professional dynamic, or a power structure in the same way again. The first principle is this: reality over morality. Not instead of morality, over it, when they conflict. This is the principle that made the church most furious. This is the insight that turned Machiavelli's name into a curse, and it is, precisely because of that reaction, the most important thing to understand. Machiavelli was not arguing that morality is worthless. He was arguing something far more sophisticated and far more threatening to the established order. That morality without the power to enforce it is just sentiment. That good intentions without strategic capability produce not virtue, but victimhood. That the road to ruin is paved not just with bad intentions, but with good intentions deployed without intelligence. Think about what this means in practice. You have been in situations, everyone has, where you knew the right thing to do, did it, and suffered for it. Where you told the truth when a strategically calibrated version of the truth would have served you better. Where you showed loyalty to an institution that did not reciprocate. Where you extended trust before it was earned and paid the price. You were operating on a moral framework, they were operating on a power framework, and the power framework won. Machiavelli's insight was not that you should abandon the moral framework. It was that you should understand when you are operating under its protection and when you are operating without it. It was that the world contains both arenas where moral norms genuinely govern behavior and arenas where they are merely performed, and that the failure to know which arena you are in is one of the most costly mistakes a person can make. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, he wrote, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves. This is the first principle working in full expression. The lion is strength. The fox is intelligence. Wisdom is knowing which one the moment requires. The powerful have always known this. The truly powerful move between these modes with the fluency of someone who has spent decades practicing. They do not choose between strength and cunning. They wield both selectively, situationally, without the emotional attachment to any single mode that makes most people predictable. Predictability is the enemy of power. We will come back to that. The second principle: perception is reality. This is perhaps the most immediately applicable of all Machiavellian principles in the contemporary world. It is also the most misunderstood because it is often interpreted as permission for dishonesty, which is not what Machiavelli argued. What he argued was simpler and more profound. The way you are perceived governs the outcomes you receive, sometimes more powerfully than what you actually are or what you actually do. Men in general judge more by the eyes than by the hands, he wrote, for everyone can see, but few can touch. Read that again. Everyone can see. Few can touch. What does this mean in practice? It means that the vast majority of the people who will make decisions about you, who will hire you or not, promote you or not, trust you or not, follow you or not, invest in you or not, will make those decisions based on observable signals, on what you project, on the narrative your presence, your behavior, and your communication creates in their minds. The person who does extraordinary work in silence and expects to be recognized purely on merit is operating on a fundamental misunderstanding of how human judgment functions. The person who understands that perception requires active management, who understands that confidence is communicated through posture before it is communicated through words. That authority is established through early framing before it is established through demonstrated competence. That narrative shapes reception before facts do. This person is playing the full game. The great CEOs understand this viscerally. Think about Steve Jobs. Whatever you think of him personally, his ability to manage perception was extraordinary. The product launches, the controlled revelations, the strategic secrecy that transformed product announcements into cultural events. The black turtleneck, a deliberate act of brand construction that said, "I am not interested in status symbols. I am above them." That was Machiavellian perception management in one wardrobe choice. Think about the way the most powerful political figures have historically controlled the narrative around them, not by hiding their strengths, by framing their narrative before their opponents could frame it for them, by establishing the terms on which they would be judged. You can apply this at every level. In a job interview, you do not walk in hoping your qualifications speak for themselves. You walk in having already decided what the story of this interaction is going to be, what the interviewer is going to feel about you before they have consciously processed a single fact about your resume. In a negotiation, you do not arrive unprepared for the emotional dynamics of the room. You arrive having already thought about the story each person in that room is telling themselves, what they fear, what they want, and how you can present your position within a frame that aligns with those existing narratives. In a leadership role, you do not simply do good work and expect morale to follow. You actively construct a narrative of progress, of shared mission, of collective identity, because the team that believes in where it is going works harder than the team that is merely informed about operational targets. This is not manipulation. This is mastery. The difference is intent. The difference is whether you are creating a false reality or communicating a true one, with the full power of every tool available to you. Machiavelli was not advising the prince to deceive. He was advising him to never be passive about how he was perceived, to never assume that truth would travel on its own without the vehicle of deliberate communication. And that advice is as precise and as necessary today as it was in 1513. The third principle: timing is a weapon. Fortune, Machiavelli famously argued, is like a river in flood. She destroys everything in her path when there is no resistance, but where there are dikes and channels prepared in advance, her power is directed and controlled. This metaphor is one of the most underappreciated ideas in Western political philosophy. What Machiavelli was describing is not luck. He was describing the relationship between preparation, patience, and decisive action. He was describing the capacity to wait strategically without passivity, with full attention, for the moment when the environment creates an opening that your preparation can exploit. The people who built the great fortunes of the 20th century understood this at a cellular level. Warren Buffett has said, famously, that investing is about waiting, that the job is not to be busy but to be ready, that the extraordinary opportunities come rarely, and that the discipline to wait for them, without being seduced into action by restlessness or by the fear of missing out, is itself a competitive advantage of enormous magnitude. That is Machiavellian timing. In personal terms, it means this: you do not escalate when your opponent is strong. You observe, you learn, you prepare, you let them extend themselves, and you act when they are overextended, when their attention is divided, when the moment is yours. It means you do not speak in a meeting the moment you have a thought. You hold it. You wait until the most strategic moment, until the moment when your contribution will land with the maximum effect, when the room is ready to receive it, when the sequence of the conversation has created the perfect frame for what you are about to say. Silence is not weakness. In a room full of people performing competence, silence is power. Machiavelli understood this. The lion waits. The predator does not run through the forest announcing itself. It positions. It observes. It moves with economy and precision when the conditions are exactly right. The fourth principle: control what you give away. It is better to be feared than loved, Machiavelli wrote, if you cannot be both. This is perhaps his most quoted and most misunderstood line. It is consistently taken to mean, be cruel, be cold, intimidate everyone around you. And people who operate on this misreading tend to create enemies, burn bridges, and wonder why they cannot sustain the power they briefly accumulate. What Machiavelli actually meant was more precise and more psychologically sophisticated. Love, as a political or social currency, is volatile. People love you when things are going well, when you are giving them what they want, when the emotional weather is favorable. But love requires maintenance. It requires constant renewal. It is dependent on the emotional state of the person who feels it. A prince who governs through love alone is governing through other people's feelings, and other people's feelings are not under his control. Fear, on the other hand, properly administered without cruelty, grounded in the credible ability to impose consequences, is stable. It is consistent. It does not depend on the emotional weather of the day. But here is the deeper insight that most people miss. The actual principle is not be feared. The actual principle is never be entirely dependent on what you cannot control. Do not be entirely dependent on people's love, because love is fragile. Do not be entirely dependent on people's trust, because trust is earned and can be lost. Do not be entirely dependent on people's respect, because respect must be continuously demonstrated. Instead, build structures. Build relationships that have practical value for both parties, not just emotional warmth. Build reputations that are grounded in consistent action, not in the impression you created on a single good day. Build things that are durable. This is what the wealthy understand about loyalty that most people do not. The person who needs to be liked by everyone is hostage to everyone's opinion. The person who has structured their relationships, their finances, their professional position, and their social capital with genuine strategic care has freedom, real freedom. Not the freedom of not caring, the freedom of not needing. There is a profound difference between not caring and not needing. Machiavelli was pointing toward not needing. The fifth principle, the long game above all. Entrepreneurs are simply those who understand that there is little difference between obstacle and opportunity, Machiavelli wrote, or rather, the essence of his thought translated into contemporary terms. The short game is emotional. The short game reacts to the immediate slight, the recent injustice, the current discomfort. The short game seeks resolution now, vindication now, satisfaction now. The long game is cold. The long game measures not the feeling of the moment but the position at the end. The long game asks not, what will make me feel better right now? But what move, right now, will put me in the strongest position 12 months from now, 5 years from now, a decade from now? Rockefeller played the long game. He did not respond to every competitive threat with immediate aggression. He watched. He calculated. He waited until he could move with overwhelming advantage. And then he moved once, completely, decisively. The Medici family, the family that shaped the Renaissance, that produced 2 popes, that funded Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, that survived for 300 years as the most powerful dynasty in Italy, played the long game at every turn. They were not the strongest militarily. They were the most strategic dynastically. They married into the right families. They funded the right institutions. They cultivated the right debts. They understood that the game was not won in a single decade but over generations. And when you look at the families who still hold power in the present, in finance, in media, in politics, you find the same pattern again and again, the long game, not the sprint, the marathon, not the reaction, the design. Now, let us look at how these 5 principles manifest in the world around you right now. In the workplace, you are in a meeting. Their colleague takes credit for an idea that was partly yours. The emotional response, the short game response, is to correct them immediately, publicly, asserting your contribution in front of the room. The Machiavellian response is different. You note it. You say nothing in the moment. You maintain composure, not out of weakness, but because you understand that an emotional public correction creates an enemy without guaranteed return. Instead, you ensure that the next time you have a significant idea, you document it clearly before it goes into the group. You establish over time a pattern of origination that is undeniable. You position yourself not as someone who fights over credit, but as someone from whom credit obviously flows, and the colleague who stole your idea once, they will not be able to do it again, because you have changed the structural conditions, not just reacted to a single incident. This is Principle 1, reality over morality, combined with Principle 5, the long game. In a relationship, you discover that someone who presents themselves as your ally has been speaking about you negatively in private. The emotional response is confrontation, or withdrawal, or retaliation. The Machiavellian response is observation. You do not reveal that you know. You continue to present the same face while quietly, deliberately reducing what you share. You protect what is actually valuable. You let them think the relationship is unchanged, while you restructure it internally, giving them access only to what serves your interests rather than what depletes your position. Not with bitterness, not with anger, with the cold precision of someone who has understood that not every person in your life has earned the access they have assumed. In leadership, you inherit a team that has a toxic member, someone whose performance is mediocre, but whose social influence within the group is significant. Moving against them immediately risks fracturing the team. Ignoring the problem allows it to calcify. The Machiavellian approach is phased and structural. You do not attack, you redirect. You restructure the conditions, the roles, the metrics, the visibility, so that the toxic dynamic loses its support structure gradually, without drama, without martyrdom. By the time the departure comes, it feels inevitable rather than targeted. The team's coherence is preserved because the exit was managed like a tide going out, rather than a wave breaking. This is the fox at work, not the lion, knowing which one to be. In all of these scenarios, notice what is consistent: emotional restraint, strategic patience, structural thinking, a view that extends beyond the immediate moment to the position you want to be in when the dust settles. This is the architecture. This is what they absorbed and you were not told. But the coldest play is still to come, the most sophisticated application, the most modern expression of these principles. Stay with me, because we are about to get into tactics, specific, applicable, immediately useful tactics for navigating the world Machiavelli described, the world you live in right now. Let us stop talking about the principles in the abstract. Let us talk about you, specifically, today. Because knowledge without application is just entertainment, and this is not meant to entertain you. This is meant to change the way you move through the world, practically, tangibly, in the actual situations you face. We are going to walk through the specific tactics, the exact moves, the precise adjustments to how you speak, how you position yourself, how you protect what matters, and how you advance when the moment is right. These are not tricks. They are the application of Machiavellian architecture to the real texture of modern life. Tactic 1. The strategic silence. Most people are terrified of silence. In a conversation, in a meeting, in a negotiation, silence feels like a void that must be filled, and so they fill it. They explain more than necessary. They qualify statements that were already strong. They offer information that was not requested and that weakens their position. You will stop doing this. Here is the practice. When you make a statement, particularly a bold statement, a request, or a position you are holding, let it land. Do not immediately follow it with justification. Do not soften it with qualifications. Do not rush to fill the silence that follows. The silence after a strong statement belongs to you. It is pressure. It is weight. It is the space in which the other person must respond, must process, must decide. Every word you add after a strong statement reduces its impact. Every explanation you volunteer gives the other party new angles to attack. Every qualification you offer signals that you are not fully certain, and certainty, whether authentic or performed, is the foundation of authority. In a salary negotiation, I am looking for 120,000. Full stop. Do not add, but I'm flexible, or if that works, or I know that's a bit above market. Let the number sit in the room. Let them respond to it. In a difficult conversation, what you did damaged the trust between us, and I need to see a change before that trust can be restored. Full stop. Do not soften it. Do not immediately pivot to reassurance. Let the weight of the truth do its work. In a meeting where you are being pressured, I'll need to think about this carefully before committing. Full stop. No explanation needed. The pause is the power. Machiavelli understood that communication is a form of strategic action, that every word reveals information, that the person who speaks most reveals most, and the person who speaks with precision, economy, and deliberate timing commands the field. Tactic 2. The preemptive frame. This is one of the most sophisticated and most immediately applicable tactics in the Machiavellian repertoire. The fundamental insight is this: whoever establishes the frame of an interaction controls its outcome. The frame is the implicit set of assumptions, values, and narratives within which the interaction takes place. And the frame is almost always established in the first moments, in the opening statement, The initial positioning, the first impression. Most people arrive at situations, negotiations, interviews, first meetings, difficult conversations, and react to the frame that has already been established by the context or by the other party. You are going to establish the frame before anyone else does. Here is how it works in practice. Before a job interview, you research not just the company, but the specific person who will interview you. You learn what they value, what they have built, what their professional narrative is. And in the first 2 minutes of the interview, you find a way to position your own narrative in alignment with theirs. You establish the frame. This is a conversation between two people who share a common vision, not a candidate being evaluated by an authority. The psychology shifts, the dynamic shifts, and it shifts because you moved first. Before a negotiation, you establish the frame with a single reframing statement. Instead of entering the conversation as a supplicant asking for something, you enter as a strategic partner presenting a proposal. I've been thinking about how we can structure this in a way that creates significant value for both of us. This is a frame. It says, we are both here to win. It says, I am not asking, I am proposing. It says, the conversation operates under the assumption of mutual benefit. Before a difficult conversation with someone who has wronged you, you decide in advance whether you want the frame to be grievance or strategic recalibration. Grievance is emotional and backward-looking. Strategic recalibration is cold and forward-looking. I want to talk about how we are going to work together going forward is a different conversation than I need to talk about what happened last week. Same subject, entirely different dynamic. The preemptive frame is the fox at work, recognizing the trap before it closes, shaping the terrain before the battle begins. Tactic 3. The calculated withdrawal. Machiavelli understood, and the powerful have always understood, that presence must be earned by absence. Think about the most compelling people you have ever encountered. The ones with genuine authority and magnetism, the ones whose opinion mattered, whose approval meant something, whose arrival changed the energy of a room. Now think about whether they were the most available, the most responsive, the most immediately present people in your life. They were not. The person who is always there, always available, always responsive, always eager to engage, is, paradoxically, less valued than the person who is selective about their presence. Not because absence creates artificial scarcity, though it does, but because availability is a signal. It signals how you value your own time, and how you value your own time is a direct communication of how you expect others to value it. Here is the practical application. In a professional context, stop being the most immediately responsive person in every communication chain. This does not mean be slow or unreliable. It means be intentional about when you respond and ensure that the pattern of your responsiveness communicates that your attention is a resource, limited and valuable, rather than a tap that is always open. In a social context, the person who is enthusiastic about every invitation, who says yes to everything, who is always available, this person is valued less than the person who is selective, not cold, selective, warm when present, genuinely engaged when engaged, but present only on their own terms, not on everyone else's schedule. In a leadership context, the leader who is always in the room, always intervening, always making every decision, this leader creates dependency, not capability. The leader who delegates, who creates space, who is visibly present at the decisive moments and deliberately absent at the operational ones, this leader creates autonomy and earns genuine authority rather than administrative obligation. Pull back and watch what follows you. Tactic 4. The strategic debt. This is one of the most quietly powerful tactics in the entire Machiavellian toolkit and one of the least discussed. Machiavelli observed that princes who relied entirely on hired forces, mercenaries, people who were loyal only as long as the payment continued, were always in a fragile position. True strength came from people who were genuinely invested, people who had skin in the game, people who had a reason beyond salary to want you to succeed. The modern translation of this principle is the strategic debt. A strategic debt is created when you do something genuinely valuable for someone without immediately asking for anything in return. You help a colleague with a problem that has nothing to do with your current priorities. You introduce two people who should know each other with no expectation of credit or reciprocity. You spend real time mentoring someone who is early in their career. What you are doing, in Machiavellian terms, is not being generous, you are being strategic. You are creating genuine obligation, not the artificial debt of a transactional favor, but the deeper, more durable obligation that comes from genuine help given freely. And when the moment comes that you need support, advocacy, information, or access, the network of genuine debts you have accumulated is an asset that no balance sheet can capture. Robert Greene calls this the law of strategic giving. The principle that the most powerful currency is not money or status, but genuine obligation, because obligation, properly created and carefully maintained, is infinitely more reliable than a contract. Notice what this is not. It is not manipulation. It is not calculated generosity performed with a hidden agenda. It is real help given because you genuinely care about the outcome for the other person, but with the additional intelligence to understand that genuine relationships of mutual benefit are built, not discovered. You build them deliberately, you maintain them strategically, and they become the architecture of a life that is both rich in human connection and protected by genuine alliance. Tactic 5. The quiet accumulation. Here is one of the most important things Machiavelli said, and one of the least quoted. Never acquire power or influence publicly until it is already secured privately. The translation into modern life is this: do not announce your ambitions. Do not broadcast your plans. Do not signal your moves before they are complete. The person who tells everyone they are going to start a company has already dispersed the energy and focus that the company requires. The person who tells everyone they are going to leave a relationship has already invited the interference, the opinions, and the pressure that makes decisive action harder. The person who tells everyone they are pursuing a promotion has already given potential competitors and opponents the information they need to work against them. The predator does not announce itself, it moves. In practical terms, this means developing a discipline of strategic opacity, not deception, not lying about your plans or your intentions, but a genuine and deliberate reduction in what you share, with whom you share it, and when. Keep your plans dark as night, Sun Tzu said, and when you move, fall like a thunderbolt. Machiavelli and Sun Tzu were not writing different books, they were writing the same book. The book that says, the world does not reward you for narrating your journey. It rewards you for arriving. Now let us talk about the mistakes, the traps, the patterns that consistently destroy people who have absorbed some of this knowledge, but not all of it. Mistake 1. Confusing coldness with strategy. The person who takes Machiavellian principles and applies them through emotional coldness, through contempt for others, through a permanent posture of superiority and distance, this person is not being strategic. They are being defended. There is a fundamental difference. Strategic restraint is chosen. It is deployed in specific contexts, for specific purposes, and it coexists with genuine warmth, genuine connection, and genuine interest in others. The person with true strategic intelligence is not the person who never cares. They are the person who chooses carefully who to care about, and how deeply, and in what ways, and who brings the full force of their intelligence and attention to those chosen relationships. The person who is permanently cold is not powerful. They are protected, and protection and power are not the same thing. Mistake 2. Applying the long game only to yourself. One of the most common failures among people who have absorbed power thinking is the development of a purely self-referential strategy. Every move calculated for personal advantage, every relationship evaluated for personal utility. This is both ethically impoverished and strategically incompetent. Because the most powerful networks are not networks of use, they are networks of genuine mutual interest. The Medici did not maintain their power for 300 years by extracting value from everyone around them. They maintained it by genuinely developing the cultural, intellectual, and artistic life of Florence, creating genuine value that made them indispensable to the world they inhabited, not just feared by it. The long game that only serves you is not a long game. It is a slow extraction that eventually depletes its own resource. The long game that creates genuine value for your family, your team, your community, your industry, is the game that compounds indefinitely. Mistake 3. Reacting to symbols rather than structures. The most common strategic error people make is responding to the wrong level of reality. Someone insults you in public. The insult is a symbol, a provocation designed to elicit an emotional response. The structure beneath it is a person who feels threatened by you. If you respond to the symbol, you engage on their terms, on their level, at a moment of their choosing. You become predictable and manageable. If you respond to the structure, if you address the underlying dynamic, the actual relationship of competition or threat, you move the entire interaction to a different level, one where your intelligence, rather than your emotion, is in command. Always ask what is actually happening here beneath what is being performed. The answer to that question is almost always more important than the surface event. By this point in this video, something has shifted. You can feel it. It is not just information you have received. It is a lens that has been activated, a way of seeing that once activated cannot be deactivated. You will read the news differently now. You will watch the dynamics in a meeting differently. You will notice the framing of conversations, the timing of statements, the strategic silences, the preemptive frames, all the machinery of power that was always operating around you, invisible because no one had named it. And naming it is the beginning of using it. Not against others, for yourself, for the life you are trying to build, for the work that matters to you, for the people who depend on you, for the person you are becoming. This is the transformation that is still to come, the full picture, the complete integration, not just seeing the game, living differently because you see it. Stay with me. We are almost at the final act. You are not the same person who pressed play on this video. I want you to understand that. Not as flattery, not as the kind of motivational statement that warms you for a moment and evaporates before you reach the door, as fact. Because something happens when the architecture of reality is revealed to you. Something shifts in the cognitive machinery, in the pattern recognition system that, from this moment forward, will never again see a social interaction, a power dynamic, or an institutional structure without asking the question Machiavelli trained his readers to ask. What is actually happening here? Not what is being said, not what is being performed. What is actually happening in the structure of power, of interest, of strategy, of positioning, beneath the surface of what is visible to the people who have not yet seen what you now see. This is not arrogance. This is clarity. And clarity, the brutal, unflinching, emotionally undefended ability to see the world as it actually operates, is the rarest and most valuable cognitive resource a human being can possess. Most people will never develop it, not because they are incapable, but because it requires something that the comfortable conditions of modern life actively discourage. The willingness to be wrong about the stories you have been telling yourself. The story that you were passed over because of bad luck, rather than because of strategic blindness. The story that the person who succeeded ahead of you was simply more talented, rather than more strategic. The story that the system is fundamentally fair, and that if you keep working hard within the rules you have been given, the outcomes will eventually reflect your effort. These stories are not entirely false, but they are incomplete, and incomplete maps lead people into terrain for which they are unprepared. Machiavelli gave you a complete map, and now it is yours to use. Let us consolidate what has been revealed in this video, because this is not the moment for vague inspiration. This is the moment for precision, the moment to name exactly what has changed, in the clearest, most specific terms possible, so that the change is permanent rather than temporary. First, you now understand that the suppression of Machiavelli was not a moral act. It was a political act. It was the powerful protecting their advantage by managing the information available to everyone else. The prince was not banned because it was evil. It was banned because it was true in a way that gave too much access to the mechanics of power. This means that every piece of knowledge that has been dismissed, caricatured, or declared dangerous deserves your most careful attention. Because the pattern repeats, the ideas that threaten the established distribution of power are the ideas most aggressively misrepresented. Learn to ask, who benefits from this knowledge being dismissed? Who gains from the population believing that power operates on purely moral principles? Who wins when you remain naive? Those questions will lead you to a great deal of truth. Second, you now understand the 5 principles. Reality over morality. Not the abandonment of ethics, but the refusal to be naively ethical in arenas that operate on power. Perception as reality, the active management of how you are seen, not because you are performing a false self, but because true capability communicated poorly is capability wasted. Timing as a weapon, patience, preparation, and decisive action in the precise moment of maximum advantage. Control what you give away, the structural building of relationships and positions that do not depend entirely on other people's emotions, and the long game above all, the absolute primacy of position over reaction, of design over impulse. These are not 5 separate ideas. They are 5 facets of a single diamond, a complete way of seeing. Third, you now have specific tactics, the strategic silence that creates weight, the preemptive frame that controls dynamics before they begin, the calculated withdrawal that builds genuine scarcity and respect, the strategic debt that creates durable alliance, and the quiet accumulation that moves like water, constant, powerful, without announcement, until the destination is reached and the arrival is inevitable. These are not abstract. Apply them tomorrow. Apply them in the next conversation you have that carries any weight at all. Watch what changes. Now, the paradox that this entire video has been building toward, here it is. Machiavelli, the man whose name became synonymous with ruthlessness, with cold manipulation, with the abandonment of principle, was, in his own life, a man of profound personal loyalty, of genuine friendship, of deep aesthetic sensibility. He wrote plays, he wrote poetry. He loved deeply and was deeply hurt by the people he served. He was a man of enormous warmth, who was destroyed by the very princes he tried to help. The irony is precise. The man who wrote the most clear-eyed account of how power actually operates was destroyed by the mechanisms of power that he described. He saw the game perfectly. He could not play it for himself. Why? Because seeing the game is necessary but not sufficient. Knowledge of how things work does not automatically confer the emotional regulation, the strategic patience, the sustained discipline required to apply that knowledge consistently under pressure. Machiavelli knew that Cesare Borgia, the model for his ideal prince, used his allies and discarded them without sentiment. And yet when Machiavelli himself was discarded by the Medicis he served, he was devastated. He spent years in desperate attempts to regain favor from people who had already moved beyond him. He knew the trap. He walked into it anyway. This is the final lesson, and it is the hardest one. Knowledge alone does not protect you. Integrated knowledge does. The difference between knowing these principles and living them is the same as the difference between knowing that sugar is bad for you and not eating it. Between knowing that emotional reactivity undermines strategic positioning and not reacting emotionally when you are humiliated, betrayed, or undervalued. The principles must be practiced, internalized, drilled into the nervous system through repeated application, first in low-stakes situations, then in progressively higher-stakes ones, until they become the default mode of operation, not a conscious override of the default. This is the work. This is the interior transformation that the video has been pointing toward from the first sentence, not just understanding how the powerful think. Becoming someone who thinks that way, naturally, sustainably, without effort, because the thinking has been integrated into who you are rather than sitting as knowledge on top of who you were. The wealthy read Machiavelli, and they did not simply study him. They absorbed him, they built him into the culture of their organizations, their families, their decision-making processes. They created environments that rewarded strategic thinking, that selected for people who could separate emotion from analysis, who could see structure beneath surface, who could hold the long game in mind while navigating the short-term complexity. And generation after generation they compounded that advantage, while the majority remained in the comfort of incomplete maps. The gap between these two groups, the Machiavellian and the naive, is not primarily a gap of intelligence. The people who are kept away from this knowledge are not less intelligent than the people who absorbed it. It is a gap of access. Access to the complete picture. Access to the map of reality as it actually is. And that is the exact gap this video exists to close. Not for everyone. Not for the person who reached this point in the video and is still looking for moral permission to engage with these ideas. If you needed that permission, you were not the intended audience. But for the person who reached this point and felt something clarify, something settle, something that was always suspected now confirmed. For that person, and you know if you are that person, the work begins now. Not tomorrow, not next week, not after you have read 3 more books. Now. In the next conversation that matters. In the next decision that carries weight. In the next situation where your default would have been reactive and your new capacity allows you to be strategic. Start there. Build from there. And do not stop. Here is the final thing. Machiavelli died poor, lonely, and forgotten by the people he had served. His book survived him by 500 years. His ideas shaped empires, corporations, dynasties, and revolutions. His thinking is present in the decisions being made right now, in rooms you will never enter, by people who would never cite him publicly. He lost the political game. He won the intellectual one, and the intellectual victory is the only one that is truly permanent. The money a man accumulates can be lost. The position a woman builds can be taken. The power a person holds can shift with the next election, the next market crash, the next generation of competitors. But the clarity of understanding, the map that allows you to see the world as it is, not as it is presented, this cannot be taken from you. This cannot be banned or burned or caricatured into irrelevance. Once it is truly yours, it is yours completely. That is what Machiavelli understood about his own legacy. He wrote the book not for the princes who would use it and discard him. He wrote it for the future, for the person who would read it 500 years later and recognize, in the precise, unflinching, unsentimental language of a man who had seen everything and flinched from nothing, the exact structure of the world they were living in. He wrote it for you. If this video has done its work, if what you have heard has not just informed you but genuinely shifted something in the quality of your attention, in the clarity of your seeing, then I want you to do something. In the comments below, write a single phrase. Not a review, not a reaction, a declaration. The declaration of a person who has decided to stop operating on an incomplete map. I see the game, and I play it on my own terms. This is not a comment, it is a statement of intent, it is the beginning of the practice. And if you choose to subscribe to this channel, if you want to continue receiving the kind of content that does not comfort you, but genuinely prepares you, then understand what you are doing when you click that button. You are not joining an audience. You are joining a small, serious, self-selected group of people who have decided that clarity is worth more than comfort, that the complete map is worth more than the reassuring story, that the work of genuine strategic development, the interior and exterior work that transforms knowledge into capability and capability into results, is worth undertaking. This is a fortress, not because it keeps things out, because it keeps the focus in. The focus on what is real, on what works, on what compounds over time into a life that is genuinely yours, built by your own understanding, on your own terms, without the naive hope that the world will be fair, or the brittle despair that it never is. It is neither. It is what you make it, armed with the right understanding. Go now. Let the silence that follows this video be the kind of silence Machiavelli understood. Not the silence of passivity, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of a person who has just been given something real and is feeling the weight of it settle into place. Let the long game begin. Let your clarity be your armor. And let the work you do from this moment forward be the kind of work that, like a book banned 5 centuries ago, cannot be stopped. Because the ideas that are true do not require permission to survive. They survive because they are true. And now they are yours.